Just a few years ago, I was asked to write an article for the edible Ojai magazine on the history of viniculture in Ventura County. This all started because there was an earthquake in 1994, and we had a crumbling brick winery building with a brandy still in the attic and many wooden casks, wine casks, that led to questions about the success of this wine venture. And so this took me back to the origins of grapevines in our county. So for that, we had to go back to the time when the Franciscan fathers brought the first grapes to California and when they established the mission system, the first one being down in San Diego in 1769. They brought the mission grape stock from Mexico for sacramental use and for table wine. And originally, though, it was imported from southern Spain. This first image of the Ventura mission I'm showing you because by 1801, Father Presidente Lasuen reported that out of 18 missions, there really were only 6 that were successful in raising grapes and pressed wine. And San Buenaventura Mission in our county was one of them. Accounts written by visitors to the missions attest to the wine's quality, with San Gabriel Mission receiving the most accolades. In a way, I think that's why most of the success of the mission grape came from San Gabriel Mission, and the grapes that we have out on our in our grapevine and our arbor are cuttings not that long ago from that mission. In 1856, when the artist of this image that you see in front of you, Henry Miller, visited San Buenaventura Mission, he lodged at the hotel across from the church that was run by a Spaniard. And he recalled the wine that they were offered. Quote, "I tasted here the first native wine raised on the mission, which, although not clarified, tasted excellent, but was very strong." The grapes raised at the mission were farther inland in the Cañada, about a mile north of the mission. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner, the image is of the grape yard where they grew the grapevines. The vineyards gradually spread, though, to the ranchos and to the towns of Alta California. The Pueblo of Los Angeles, as early as 1831, had 100 acres of grapes vines planted within the city limits. And by 1850, when this image was made, Los Angeles was determined the leader in viniculture in California, producing 57,000 gallons of wine that year. Known as, quote, the city of vineyards, unquote, grapes were cultivated more than any other fruit. The high prices received for their wines led to an expansion as far north as the Sacramento Valley, where the mission grape had been planted in the late 1840s. And this image is interesting. I think it's from, it was done originally, actually 1849, by Edward Ord in a survey that he did. And you can see in the center part, lower part, is where the plaza was, but all below it are all the sections of the grapevines that are planted and the names of all the owners of the grapevines. So there were just 2 crops that actually are shown in this image. It's hard to see because it's so small, but they raised corn and they raised grapes, and that was it. This image then is a photograph, the earliest one of Los Angeles, showing the same image, I mean, almost like you saw before. You can see off in the distance of the San Gabriel Mountains, and then you see the Los Angeles River coming down, and there's the city of Los Angeles, and that long white building that you see kind of in the lower left corner, that's the mission church that was in the plaza, and the roads leading up to it, and the plaza square. Ygnacio Valle was living in Los Angeles Plaza by 1850. His long, low adobe was south of the 2-story Lugo adobe, and you can see that there in the image, where Ygnacio bought land that stretched eastward to the river. Known as Del Valle's Hall, it had a thatched roof, 2 doors and 4 windows looking over the plaza with a full-length porch supported by wooden posts and a low railing. Before going any further, I want to tell you about Ygnacio Del Valle, his background before he came to Los Angeles. This is important for us to understand that. He was born in 1808 in the state of Jalisco, Mexico, to a family of wealth and position. At the age of 18, he followed his father Antonio into the military in 1825, training as a cadet at the Santa Barbara Presidio. His next 15 years were spent in military service in San Diego and in Monterey, having been appointed by Governor Figueroa to secularize the missions. Figueroa also put him in charge of military command when he was absent from the Presidio. Following his discharge from the military in 1839, he began his long career of public service with his election to the State Assembly, and he served as treasurer during the 1840s. And at the same time, in 1842, his father Antonio died, and that's when Ygnacio inherited the Rancho Camulos we have here today, 1,800 acres of it. It was actually a part of his father's large land grant, which was Rancho San Francisco, and it was 48,000 acres that his father had received for his services to the Spanish government. By 1850, when Ygnacio was living in Los Angeles, he met and he married Isabel Varela in 1851. And at the time, he was serving as mayor of the city of Los Angeles, and he also, during that decade of the 50s, was elected recorder of the county of Los Angeles. When he married her, she was just 14 years old, and she was way under 5 feet tall. And he was 43 years old. This was his second marriage. His first wife, he married, and she died of childbirth. He married her in 1842 after he inherited Camulos, but she didn't live very long and died 5 years later. So when he moved to Los Angeles, then they were living in Santa Barbara, that he at that time then met Isabel and married her. Their home on the plaza was a center for political discussions and for a resting stop for their many friends. And among those friends was a person by the name of William Wolfskill, who was one of the largest grape growers in the city. Wolfskill later switched to citrus, and Ygnacio obtained cuttings from him for the citrus, and also probably, we have records of that. We don't have records of the wine stock, but I'm sure he must have probably gotten his wine stock as well from Wolfskill. And during this time, when they were living out in the plaza, they had 5 children. But by 1861, they decided it was time to move to the ranch. The adobe building was started to being built in 1852 before they moved here. And then when they got here in 1861, they began adding on to it, and it took on its present day sort of U-shaped form. This image is done by, was taken, the photograph in 1876 by a photographer by the name of Carlton Watkins. He was one of the most acclaimed photographers of the American West during the 19th century. He was mostly well known for his photographs of Yosemite Valley, and these photographs were one of the reasons why the Yosemite became a national park, because based on his images that were shown all around the world. But anyway, he was down here in Southern California, and he was photographing the missions. He was doing a series of mission photography at the time, and he was also photographing the railroad, the Southern Pacific. Had just come through in 1876. So that was the same year that he took this photograph, 1876. So he was in this area at that time. We don't have any other photographs of this place then, but we have this one, which was an amazing feat to get this, but it was found at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of all things. They had other photographs of his in their collection, some from Yosemite, but his work is all around in museums throughout the world. But we have this one image. So after the family moved here with their 5 children, they planted the next year the first 90 acres of grapes. And it generally takes about 6 years for grape stalks to reach their maturity. So in 1866, Del Valle paid an excise tax on 50 gallons of grape brandy, and he also had this license that you see here from the Internal Revenue Service to distill at Camulos. And so we'll talk about how he was able to do that. Then in 1867, the 2-story brick winery was completed, and a shipment of wine barrels was received. This impressive winery was 2 stories in height. It was 36 feet wide and 132 feet long, and it cost over $10,000 to construct at that time, which was quite a lot of money. And this is an image, a drawing that was done by Henry Withy. He was an architect and he worked for the Historic American Building Survey. He did these drawings in 1934. So this is a side view and both the north and south view of the winery. And what's important about the work that he did when he did the drawings, he also listed, you can't read it there, it's too small, but he talked about how it had changed, the winery had changed over the years and things that they had done to it on the interior and exterior. Here's a drawing of it. That's the front view of it, but it's a cross section, so it shows on the interior that there was a partition set aside for the office, and then there was a stairway that led up to the upstairs, and that's where we found all of the treasures when we were doing a survey of the objects inside the winery building. In 1886, more wine barrels and a copper still were ordered by Del Valle and brought from San Francisco to Ventura on the ship Perkins. And the still, it was loaded in a small boat just beyond the breakers off San Buenaventura and then floated into shore. And the wine barrels were just tossed overboard and floated in because they didn't have a pier. This is one of those huge, probably 800-gallon wine barrels. This was not at Camulos. I searched for many images, and this image was one of the wineries in Los Angeles, but we also have kind of a low ramp that would go up that they would have to load the wine barrels to get them inside of the winery. And these are our wine barrels on the second floor of the winery building. And then this last one is shown not here, but how it would have looked inside the winery. And there's one of the men repairing some of the wine barrels. So it gives you sort of a sense of how they were used inside the building. In 1870, the California State Agricultural Census was produced. And at that time, there were just 4 grape growers making wine in the area that was Ventura County. And that year, there were 53 tons of mission grapes harvested for wine and brandy. Only 3 ranches were responsible for producing these large quantities. And of the vineyards, Dominguez and Ruiz, listed in the 1870, Ygnacio del Valle operated the largest. He produced both wine and brandy, and his capital investment was $50,000, which included the brick building, as I mentioned before. He also had a still that I mentioned and a wine press. He hired 2 males, 7 women, and 7 children, paying them wages of $1,890 at the time. He raised 45 tons of mission grapes at $40 a ton, valued at $1,890. So the results were 6,000 gallons of wine valued at $3,000 and 800 gallons of brandy valued at $1,600. I didn't try to translate it into present day figures to see how that worked out, but it's just interesting to note, that how important the winery out here was. According to historian Wally Smith, who wrote in This Land Was Ours, the Del Valles and Camulos, a history of the Del Valle family, quote, Camulos wines and brandies were soon a leading Southern California seller, unquote. Ignacio's friend, Ulpiano Indart, wrote to him announcing that he was opening a new store in Santa Barbara in 1868 and wanted to obtain some of the best wine from Camulos. Indart was an old friend and a very close friend from Ignacio's past in Los Angeles. He now was the owner of Rancho Najoqui up in Santa Barbara, and he also had a townhouse in Santa Barbara. He was the godfather to several of the Del Valle children, and Ulpiano was named for him, one of the Del Valle sons. And this article we found in the Santa Barbara newspaper shows the new grocery store of Indart being opened and the Camulos wines and brandies being featured. I think this was an interesting photo. It's hard to find images of winemaking and wineries during that time period. So even though this is an Indart's store, it's probably what it looked like in the back because that's where he kept all of his kegs of wine, and people would go in the back and he would pour wine into the bottles then. The demand for pure Camulos wine and choice Camulos wine, and especially Camulos brandies, was such that Indart soon dispensed them both by the bottle from his shelves and by the keg from a back room of his Santa Barbara store. And this is the wine label that was specially made for his wine that he sold in his store. So it said from the vineyard of Ygnacio del Valle, but bottled by Ulpiano Indart. So this is something I didn't actually realize, and because we have other labels, but this was just for Indart and the ones he sold up in his Santa Barbara store. This is an interesting image. It's a license to sell at a retail liquor store, and this was pasted on the beam of the cellar of the big adobe when we were doing down in the cellar, and we were looking through all the old furniture and the wine kegs that were down there. We found this huge license pasted on the beam that's supporting the floor of the big adobe. So it was quite interesting to see, and this is from the 1870s. But not all aspects of the new winery ran smoothly in the beginning. In 1870, Ulpiano Indart, in a letter to Ygnacio, acknowledged receipt of the wine with a complaint of its sweet quality and stating the need for it to be aged for several years before it could be sold. A few years later, he complained that he had to return a barrel because it had first contained whiskey and hadn't been cleaned properly, thus turning the wine to vinegar. Yet by 1871, the Santa Barbara Times could proclaim for Camulos, quote, over 50,000 bearing grapevines, an additional 1,000 are set out every year. The vintage for the past 4 years has averaged nearly 15,000 gallons of wine and brandy a year. Also in a Los Angeles Herald article in 1877, so this is 6 years later, reported Camulos as a, quote, combination of vineyard, fruit, and flowers, surrounded by lofty mountains covered with verdure, with a beautiful river, makes it a very paradise of loveliness. Immense crops of corn, barley, and wheat are annually produced, also about 40,000 gallons of wine and brandy. It is a beehive of industry, no place for idle men here, unquote. So by that time, Ygnacio had tripled his 1871 production. Although he'd established a solid reputation for brandies and wines in both Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, he was still unable to compete with the growers in the Northern California region and also the imported products that were coming in. And his son, Reginaldo, who was a recent graduate of the Santa Clara University and had begun work in San Francisco in an attorney's office, he advised his father of the difficulty he would have selling his products in the leading stores up in the Bay Area, since his prices were competitive with French and other imported wines and brandies. But once he corrected his problems with aging and the improperly cleaned barrels, he was able to dispose of most of his wine through Indart and in the city of Los Angeles. Nevertheless, Reginaldo's prediction was coming true. The agricultural census for 1880 shows that while Camulos remained the leader in winemaking in Ventura County, producing 5,000 gallons of wine on 60 acres of vineyards, more than any other grower, the volume was only a third of 10 years earlier. 8 smaller growers were listed in the Satacoy Township and 16 acres in Hueneme Township. The majority were growing an acre or less of wine grapes for personal consumption. So among some of these other Ventura County vineyards, I'm going to show you just a few slides that I've obtained to give you a sense of what else was happening here. This photograph, courtesy of Jeffrey Mulhart, is the Gottfried Mulhart Ranch on the Oxnard Plain. The Mulharts had settled over in the Oxnard area even before it was called Oxnard, back in the late 1860s when land was opened over in that area. And so they moved in and established a home, and this is their house, probably built in the 1870s. And on the right is their little brick winery. So most of the grapes that they grew were for the Santa Clara Church, which was across the river. So they were really just growing it for personal use and for the church to use for communion, I imagine. And today, this ranch has been saved, and the winery's been saved, and they've planted wine grapes. And it's now called the Oxnard Farm Park. The house is still there, and the winery is still there too. And in Heritage Square in Oxnard, they recreated this little winery building over there to the exact dimensions. And I think they thought it was going to be torn down, but instead the developer built all around it and saved the ranch house and the winery. So we still have one of these older wineries left. Another leading grower on the this one in Rancho Santa Clara del Norte was this Sanchez family. Juan Sanchez was the receiver of a grant of Rancho Santa Clara del Norte, which is near the Satacoy area, sort of south of the river. And he had an adobe house there, but in the 1880s, the Chiapa Pietra brothers from Ventura were able to get this house through a bet that Sanchez lost his property, and they obtained it. And so they built this house around the adobe. The adobe's inside this house. It's still there. And it's at the end of Rose Avenue, I think it is, and Highway 118. If you were to look down a long drive, you would see this house. And this is the grounds of the house. It's a very interesting property. It's the Lloyd Butler property today. They were descendants of the Chiapa Pietras. But the only remnant left is just the name Vineyard Avenue. Vineyard Avenue was the boundary of the ranch, and that was where the area where the wine grapes were grown. So they grew quite a few grapes, but no winery left, no more grape growing over there. But someone who is growing grapes now is on the property that was first started to be developed by a man by the name of Jose de la Riva. And this was along San Antonio Creek. It was where the area now where Miners Oaks is not too far from, but it's Old Creek Road. But it's not the one that goes through to Ojai. It's just a dead-end road, but that's where the winery was. And this is the winery building itself. But today, only the foundation is left. The building itself has been torn down, but it was a wooden building with a very large foundation, and the owner is planning to restore this winery building. And this is the De La Riva family. They had 6 children. They were Mr. De La Riva seems like quite a character, and the family seems quite interesting. And this is a picture of him later on in his life. He's pouring some wine for a friend. So we did a report on this winery. That's why I have all these images, Mitch and they're now making it into Old Creek Winery. Another person's bought it, and they're restoring the building. So, and you can go out there now, and they've just planted their grapes about a year ago, I think it is. So there's a few wineries still left. There were many small growers that weren't even mentioned in the agricultural census. Juan and Francisca Dominguez was one of those couples. They homesteaded on 160 acres of land between Piru and Fillmore in what was later called Dominguez Canyon. And this was during the 1870s. And they raised wine grapes for personal consumption and also to sell and to trade. And they would take the wine to Los Angeles in a horse-drawn wagon to trade for goods needed for the family. And the reason we have this image is because this is their wine press, and Camulos did not have a wine press left here, although we know we had a wine press. So this may have been one that would have been similar to the one that was here on this property, but we don't know. But the descendants of the Dominguez family donated this to us, and it's on the porch of the big adobe now. With the death of Ygnacio del Valle in 1880 at the age of 72, Isabel, as owner of the ranch, had to sign all the legal documents. This one is kind of an interesting one. This was sent to her by the United States Treasury, I think, if I'm reading this right. But anyway, they wanted to find out when they could send their gauger out, which was somebody, I guess, who, when they were doing distilling process, they had a gauger. Ygnacio had been ill for over a year before his death, and he had gone to Los Angeles. He was in the hospital there, but he asked to be taken back to Rancho Camulos when he knew the end was near, and he died at home here in the big adobe in April of 1880 and was buried in the family graveyard. The Los Angeles Herald stated, quote, "Few men have impressed upon the memory of their friends a lovelier sense of excellence and unsullied virtue. In the domestic and private circle, he was greatly beloved. He was confiding and affectionate. With those whom he was intimate, he indulged in playful and delicate humor," unquote. And the Ventura Free Press wrote, "He was one of the most courteous and accomplished gentlemen we ever met. Among those who knew him, probably no man in California was more universally esteemed, loved, and honored." And Wally Smith had these quotes in his book on the Del Valle family. He made this little remark that it was interesting. the Ventura Free Press said such nice things about him because they were always fighting him because he was a Democrat and they were Republicans. So it was interesting. The Directory of Grape Growers that you see here, a page from, published by the State of California Viticulture Commission in 1891, lists just 5 grape growers making wine in Ventura County, and Isabel del Valle now remained the largest with 35 acres in mission grapes, 10,000 gallons of wine produced in 1889. The other 4 wine grape growers were all in the Ojai Valley, but reported no production, meaning their vines likely had not reached maturity. And some of these growers were growing table grapes, so they were not included in. This is an image from around 1910 of the winery, just to give you a sense of, by that time, it was probably not used for making wine then, but it began to be used for storing farm equipment and such in. And this is the south end of it where they would wheel the wagons in with the grapes. And this is the only early photo I found of the inside of it. And it shows the grapes hanging from the beams. You can see them drying. They actually produced raisins out of their grapes too. And this image was done in 1934 when the HAB survey was being done. They took photographs of all the buildings then. So those are really helpful to see how it was at that time. It's uncertain when the last of Camulos vines were removed, but in 1900, the citrus orchards were enlarged and 175 acres were devoted to apricots and walnuts. 44 acres were planted of Valencia oranges that year. And then by 1924, when the ranch went out of the hands of the Del Valle family to the August Rubel family who owns it today, citrus, walnuts, and apricots had entirely replaced grapes. The factors leading to the decline of the winery era in Ventura County were twofold. The first was the mission grape. Though it produced an inferior product compared to European varieties, which were better suited for the Northern California climate, it was established early and it remained widely grown in the South. The second was the railroads, which not only lowered the barriers to imported competition, they altered the land economics for growers, opening eastern markets to higher value agricultural products from Southern California, most notably oranges and lemons. This is a page from the Statistical History of Wine Grape Acreage in California from 1856 to 1992 by Ernest Pininu, published in 2000. And this was just Ventura County, but it starts in the 1870s because that's when it became a county, even though grapes were being raised, in the 1860s, maybe even in the 1850s. But it's interesting to see where the peak is. You can see from the 1870s and then the 1880s, 90s, then way down, and then way up during Prohibition. And all that time period up there is that time of Prohibition from 1919 to 1931, I guess it was something in that. And then by the 40s, it started dropping and dropping lower and lower and lower. But today, of course, it's changing because we have so many new wine growers. Although the wine industry never flourished in Ventura County as it did in Los Angeles County in Northern California, it did form a very essential part of the early agricultural history of the county. It also produced the largest and oldest extant winery building, today an important feature of our Rancho Camulos Museum, which is listed as a National Historic Landmark. And I have a few wine labels to show you. This one is in our collection in the library archive that we have in the small adobe up front. And it's similar to the labels that were used on the oranges and so forth, but this is a much smaller image. It doesn't say it's for wine, but this was, I'm pretty sure that's what this one was for. And these are some new ones that we just got from the Seaver Center at the Natural History Museum, which has a huge Del Valle collection of papers there that starts from the 1830s through the about 1900. So this is the Choice Old Port, the Choice Camulos Old Port. So they made port in addition to brandy too, and the red wine, the Choice Camulos white wine, and you can see there's no Indart name on the label. These were the labels on the bottles that were done here. And this was the find, the Ramona brand of California raisins, which has made me didn't realize that they were selling raisins. And they used the image again of another, of the grape arbor. That same arbor is still there today and has the grapevines on it. So this was kind of a nice find, recent find that we got, so. And I think that's it.